Yeah, so I'll go meet with a professor on that. And then I also met with a history professor who I was thinking about being a history major too. Well, as it turned out, the history professor canceled and I only met with a wildlife professor, and that's what I majored in college. So I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know you could even have a job doing fish and wildlife biology. So after a year of college, I started to look at jobs and internships during the summer season. And as you go forward, I'll say that's for you kids out there. It's really, really important to get some experience working for an agency or getting some of these summer jobs, because I've learned probably more in those positions than I have in my schooling. So I was looking for jobs and I got really into ducks. I wanted to be a duck biologist. I thought ducks were the coolest thing. Banding ducks, working with them. And so I got down to the finals for two jobs. One working with ducks in South Dakota with Fish and Wildlife Service, and then one working with aquatic invasive species with the Iowa DNR. And as it turned out, Iowa DNR offered me the job first, and I took it. So I kind of applied for that job kind of on a whim. It was kind of close to home, but I didn't think much about it. So long story short, I got into fish, and that is how I got into fish, is from my very first summer job. So I started working for the Iowa DNR Aquatic Invasive Species Program, and this picture is actually from the Cedar River. It's downtown Cedar Rapids. And when I talk about aquatic invasive species, I'm primarily talking about Asian carp. I'm sure you've heard some of those stories about jumping carp, and we have them around Nebraska, and zebra mussels also too. So we spent a lot of time trying to find out where Asian carp were. And these pictures of the boat is actually a technique to sample fish called electrofishing. So we actually pump electricity in the water to stun the fish. It doesn't hurt the fish. It kind of puts them to sleep, and we can capture them. So we were on the boat trying to capture fish that way. So that was my very first position in fish and wildlife, and that kind of set me on my path for the future. So I guess that kind of be open-minded, because you never quite know what you're going to be working with eventually. So and really this position kind of set me up for the rest of my career, and I still have relationships from this one. So it's really, really cool to see that. So I went back to college, and I have another year, and I wanted to look for another summer position, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. Now I knew I wanted to work with fish. I didn't really know much more than that. So I took a position working as a research technician for a graduate project in the glorious Nebraska Sandhills. And I had never been in Nebraska besides Omaha. I'm an Iowa boy. So I spent a summer working on the Valentine National Wildlife Refuge, sampling lakes for vegetation and zooplankton and bugs and fish and all kinds of stuff. And that was some of the coolest places I've ever been to. If you're not familiar with the Sandhills, it's actually one of the largest contiguous wetland complexes in the country. So it's a very unique resource we have here. And these lakes are really unique because you see them scoured out. They're scoured out by wind. Like it's really, really bizarre. And if you look at it from the satellite imagery, it's really, really cool. So again, a place in Nebraska that is so unique, from the fish and birds and mammals and all kinds of plant species that are here, very, very unique. So I got to work there. So my job was running a boat, doing a bunch of surveys and stuff like that. And in the Sandhills, if you're from Nebraska, the Sandhills are known for their big bluegill. That's actually why the project was going on, trying to find why we had big bluegill. And as it turned out, it's because we had a lot of big fish to eat them too. So, and that's something that's Game Parks is still working on. And this was 2010, and I'm here 11 years later. So that's something to think about, managing fish. But this is where I first got into research, and I got an opportunity to work with an undergraduate research project working on determining when a bluegill, like these sunfish, spawn and sort of when their larvae are made. So I actually got a project working with determining the age of fish. So if you guys aren't familiar, these images on the top of the screen are called otoliths. So they're the ear stones of fish, much like what we have as humans. But the really cool thing about this is for each day a fish is alive, it puts down a ring of growth, much like a tree ring. And when all these rings stack up, daily rings for when they grow, like during the winter when fish aren't eating, it actually puts down these annual rings. So you can tell how old a fish is by counting those white rings around this otolith. Something I never knew. I had fish, and something I just like blew my mind when I learned about it. So I thought that was really cool. So my undergraduate research project was looking at, and this is actually a picture here, capturing baby larvae, like a ½ inch long of bluegill, and taking their and actually trying to figure out how old they are and see when they hatch. So that was something I thought was the coolest thing ever. So kind of being open to new things, like I never thought that was something that you could do with fish. So that was really, really cool. So that was my summer. And then I went back to school again, and I got another summer job again with the Iowa DNR in Southwest Iowa. So I saw the Montgomery County Conservation Board was on this, and I actually worked at Cold Spring State Park in Lewis, Iowa, is where I worked for a seasonal. And I got introduced to these fish called red ear sunfish. So I got, you'll find a pattern that I got kind of in love with sunfish. People ask me my favorite fish, and I've worked with a bunch, but working in this part of the country and working with so many different species, I always thought the sunfish were the coolest. So I helped a lot with some of the management activities, your electrofishing lakes and stuff. I will notice I haven't been able to use this picture because I'm not wearing a life jacket, which shows you how good my supervisor was when I was an intern. So that's something funny to think about when you look through old pictures. But a lot what I worked with too was aquatic vegetation. So we were actually trying different research projects to look at how to introduce plants into lakes for wildlife and fish, for habitat, for food, and things like that. So, and this is sort of the second time in my career, I should have mentioned before, when I worked with Iowa, where I got introduced to aquatic vegetation, all this, all that seaweed growing in the water, right? It's a lot of people, and even biologists I know now just dismiss it, think it's weeds or algae. But I think it's really, really cool. And I started to really nerd out on aquatic vegetation, aquatic plants. And I know that makes me sound like a big nerd, and I am, believe me. But it's something that I got really passionate about, and I learned a lot about, and I can ID species and things like that. And I will not tell you how many times in my career that's helped me. It's something a skill that nobody really looks at or wants to research or get proficient at. And that's sort of something to think about out there, that if you're passionate about something and some people aren't really excited about it, it's not necessarily you, it's just that it's something that no one's willing to do. So that's something that's really helped me in my career. So after that, I went back to college and graduated, and now I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. So I knew I wanted to still work something with fish. I wasn't quite sure. I knew I wanted to work with sport fish. I wanted to work with bass or bluegill. So I went to graduate school at Oklahoma State doing my master's work on aquatic plants and largemouth bass. So my project was working at in a lot of the lakes, they're really, really muddy and stuff doesn't grow, and fish need vegetation to, as nursery habitat, basically, when they're young. So the state wanted to introduce this plant here called American water willow into all these lakes for bass habitat. So my master's was looking at how effective that would be for baby bass. So yeah, I was all in on bass and stuff, but I also got to help with a lot of other research projects that I thought were really, really cool. I got to work with, flathead catfish, which I had never worked with flathead catfish before, and caught these just giant fish, and thought it was the coolest thing ever, pulling nets out and things like that, And then one of my most memorable experiences just in fisheries in general is I got to help with a paddlefish project. If you're not familiar with paddlefish, they're kind of an ancient fish found in the Missouri River, the Mississippi River. They're kind of like sharks, and trying to use sonar to detect them in streams. So I actually got to use sonar to detect paddlefish, and then we had to go back and see them back in the river. So we actually got to sample these giant 100-pound paddlefish that are 5 feet long, right here in Nebraska, because this was in Oklahoma, but they're right here too. So that was definitely a highlight of my career. So I got done with the graduate school. I was gung-ho. I was like, I'm going to be a bass biologist. That's what I wanted to do. That was what I wanted to do for my career. And it turned out it was kind of hard to get a job, even after school. So I actually interviewed for 22 different jobs, from Florida to Connecticut to Kentucky to Texas to all over the country. So it wasn't easy. You really had to be persistent and kind of have this mantra that you're going to get there. So the first place that I got a position was with Arizona Game and Fish Department, as their sport fish research biologist. And I had never been west of Nebraska. So I thought I was crazy moving to the desert to be a fish biologist. Like, there's no water. It's like the worst career move you could make. But I get to Arizona, and it's this really cool, diverse state where we have canyons and pine trees and, snowmelt streams and things like that. But definitely that made me feel out of my element. I was not trained for anything like this. I had never worked with mountain streams. I never worked with stuff like this. And I saw some places that I honestly could not believe I was working in places that, just had a wildfire the previous year, trying to look at if fish were still alive, or some of these streams that are at 12,000 feet where you see native fish that are found nowhere else. So again, being, from the Midwest, that was a real eye-opener for me, and kind of terrifying, because I remember driving down my first canyon road, and I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do? But the other big thing that changed when I went to Arizona is it's a much different, water base out there. So a lot of it's trout, and I hadn't had no schooling with trout, no experience with trout. I had never worked with them before. So I was anxious taking the position because I had never worked with that before. But it just kind of goes to show you that you may not never know what you're going to be working with. I never thought I'd be working with, trout in mountain streams when I was, wanting to work with, bass and bluegill and do that kind of thing. So that was really, really cool. And one of my first projects working on, so these are some pictures of the field sites. This is the Mogollon Rim. This is the historical range of Apache trout and Gila trout, is working with Apache trout. And my very first project was working with radio telemetry to look at how trout move in streams. So we actually put fish asleep with anesthesia, used a scalpel, and put a little radio tag in the fish. You can see the wire hanging out. Let them heal up and put them back in the stream. And here I am in the stream, and right below my feet where my antenna are, so where my antenna is a trout. There's a trout right below my feet. So I had never even thought about doing anything like that. So we were trying to restore Apache trout, which are a federally threatened species nationally. So yeah, things you never think you'll be doing. And I want to keep impressing that you never know quite sure what you'll be working on. But part of the coolest thing being this Midwest boy is I had never been in the mountains before. So here I was hiking and backpacking and things like that. And this picture is from the East Fork of the Black River. So this is in wilderness area. This is near the New Mexico border. And, I got paid to camp here for 2 weeks and just track trout, just sleep in a sleeping bag in a tent and just hike all day long. So no radio, no cell service, no radio. I had to hike on top of a hill to call in on my radio every day, because something that was new for Arizona is there are places that are so remote, and we had to call in on the radio to headquarters, let them know where we were, our last position, and if we didn't call back in, they would start sending out search and rescue. which, helicopters and things like that, which was terrifying for me to think about, like, to be in a place like that. So, and people always stop me. He's like, you got paid to camp, in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone. It was the best 2 weeks of my life. I'll tell you, it was to be cut off from everything is pretty cool. But also I got to see some pretty cool wildlife. So while I was hiking up in the, mainly up in the White Mountains, there's a lot of bighorn sheep. So when I was hiking for trout, I came across this giant ram, and he stared at me for about 10 minutes. I was 10 feet away, and it was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life. And then I also got to help out with the bear tagging. So again, I'm a fish guy. I'm not at this point in my life, never worked with wildlife. And what happened is we were in the mountains and staying up there for a couple of weeks to do surveys, and we got a call from another game and fish wildlife person that they had tranquilized this bear that had wandered into a campground that was, trying to eat human food. So they needed help with it. So we meet with them, and we got to put, tags in the ear of a bear and get close with it. And I thought, that is so weird. Like, it's like, to think I was touching a bear, like it's still one of the craziest things too. So, it's just, some of the experiences you have while you're just out, doing your work and, helping with other people are pretty cool. So yeah, definitely some of the highlights of when I was, out in the mountains. So.
Kris, I got one question quick.
Sure.
I had a question sent to me from Lynn, and she was asking, with the radio telemetry and the trout, what specifically were you studying at that time?
Gotcha. We were studying how far they moved after we stocked them. So like I said, these were threatened fish, a threatened listed fish. And we wanted to see when we stocked them, how far upstream or downstream they would move, like whether they would just stay in the same hole or whether they would move miles downstream. And we actually found that some moved 10, 12 miles downstream. And you think about some of these little streams, it's pretty cool. So yeah, that was the main purpose of the project. I should have mentioned that. That's a good question. So while I was a sport fish biologist, I also worked in Phoenix. So that was where I was based. So I got to help a lot with the urban projects around Phoenix. And this is a picture when I helped out with the Phoenix College Lab, and we were sampling a lagoon in central Phoenix with all kinds of trash and things like that to see what was in there. And this class was really cool because these were a conservation class, freshmen that came mainly from at-risk or tough backgrounds, and they're on this kind of fast track to be kind of a wildland worker. So that was really cool to take them out and show them how to sample fish for the first time. And that's really where I found I loved to teach. So I taught when I was in grad school, and capturing some of these fish. Here's an underpass where there's cars going ahead of us, and finding some of these weird species in the middle of the 5th biggest city in the country was pretty cool. And to see the reaction when we caught some fish. Some of the guys weren't too happy about when we caught some of the carp and trying to handle the carp. And, that's always the coolest thing is, especially with fish, it makes it harder because you never know what's beneath the water. It makes it much harder to sample, but it also adds that mystery of what you're going to find. So I've always thought that's something really, really cool that gets people interested. So then I took another position in northern Arizona up by Sedona, working with native aquatic species. So again, something I had never really worked with before. I kind of got interested in native species when I started working with Apache trout, but this was a whole different world. So now I worked at the Aquatic Research and Conservation Center, which is a facility designated to trying to improve the survival of native and endangered fish. So now I'm in the lab, I'm kind of in my mad scientist hat. So that kind of, you can think about that. So my first project was to find out how to spawn some native fish. So this is Oak Creek, this is up by Sedona. And we got a directive to find out a way to spawn this native fish called a Sonora Sucker. It's a native sucker. And the reason why they wanted us to find a way to spawn it is in Arizona, we don't have many native fish. Minnows aren't native, bass aren't native, catfish aren't native, frogs aren't native, bullfrogs, crayfish aren't native. So they're importing all these fish from across, the country, and they may have invasive fish in there. And that's why we were told to try and find a way to spawn these guys in captivity, because that hadn't been done before. So that was kind of the first step. So we went out and collected a bunch of adult fish, and we injected them with hormones. So there's a fish hormone called Overprim, kind of like IVF treatment, and we actually inject the fish to kind of get the gonad process starting. Again, talk about stuff you never thought you'd be doing, injecting, hormones into a fish to try and get it to spawn in captivity. So with the hormone treatments, it actually worked. So this is a male Sonora Sucker, and we got what's called milt, or the sperm of fish. It's called milt when it's in fish. And we actually produced that. And we got really, really lucky, and we actually had one female that spawned. And we were actually to try and artificially, not artificially, but to kind of naturally make a Sonora Sucker. So here's a tub of Sonora Sucker eggs. And what we're doing is trying to put the milt in there and mix the milt together to fertilize the eggs, excuse me. So again, this hadn't really been done before, so we weren't really sure how it would work. So we did that. And the first thing we noticed is when we did that is the eggs stuck together. And if you stuck together, they can't get oxygen and they'll die. So we had to mix them together, and then we actually put them. So this kind of gives it away. We were successful. In this jar on the right. So this was called a hatching jar. So this keeps the eggs moving so they don't stick together. So pretty much they don't die of oxygen. So after a few weeks, we get the baby Sonora Suckers. And, after a few months, we get even bigger baby Sonora Suckers. So that was the first project I worked with. And that was my kind of first foray into native species. So that was really, really cool. So that was the first project I worked with.
Okay, couple questions for you.
Absolutely. Fire
First
away.
of all, Nick asks, what is the coolest non-target thing you have ever turned up while electrofishing?
Non-target thing, that's a good question. Probably the weirdest thing I've encountered was a beaver. He was very, very angry. He slapped his tail a few times at us and stomped away. That was the one thing I remember being the weirdest thing ever that we got while electrofishing. So.
I'm assuming it wasn't enough to really stun him, just kind of like
no,
irritate
it just
him.
made him really mad, really, really mad. I've never seen a beaver be that mad before. So.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And then we had another person ask, what does fish stocking mean?
Oh, okay. Fish stocking means when fish raised in a hatchery or moving fish from one lake to another. It just means I'm moving fish into one water body, basically. So yeah, usually when we say stocking, it comes from a hatchery. So.
Okay, awesome. So you're not like stalking them on Facebook and chasing them and.
No, we're not actually stalking them. Although I guess with the trout, we were kind of stalking them, trying to find where they were. So.
Awesome. Feel free to keep asking questions, guys. Kris, you can keep going.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely some weird stuff. Definitely when you're out in the woods and doing some of your surveys. So kind of get into that. So one day I was capturing a Sonora Sucker adults on Oak Creek. It was me and my intern. It was a normal Thursday day. It was cold for Arizona, not for Nebraska. It was like 45, and I was freezing there, but it's how things change. And then this guy walks up to us as we're sampling fish using nets in the stream. And he's a reporter for NBC in Phoenix. And he just happens to have his news camera. And apparently when he vacations, he just goes out and looks for stories. So I got impromptu interviewed for the 12 o'clock, for Phoenix 12 News. And I'm going to show you the clip, because it's kind of funny, some of the quotes I come up with. So as biologists, we're not really trained to work with the press. We're not made for the nice sound bites and things like that. So when you get asked questions, it's kind of funny to think some of the stuff right off the top of your head. So, so I'm not sure how the audio will work, Lauren. You'll have to tell me if people can hear it, okay? But I'll give it a try, all right? Is that good?
We can kind of hear it, but it's very quiet.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that would work or not, so it's not
potentially. If you want to try to reshare your screen, and then there's the little like check mark that's like share the computer audio as well, if you would like to try that.
Okay, so try stop sharing and share again.
Yeah, so stop sharing, and then you'll hit share screen, and then there'll also be a box that you can check that's share computer audio as well.
Gotcha. Okay, let's try this, okay?
Fish could play a
We can hear you.
Preserving Arizona's long-term population of water wildlife. It's called the Sonora Sucker fish.
And Team 12's Joe Dana was introduced to it on a recent trip to Sedona. And Joe, this little guy is suddenly getting a lot of attention from state researchers. How come?
Well, it's an ideal candidate to be Arizona's first truly native bait fish. Researchers hope that by spawning this homegrown Sonoran sucker fish, they can use it to help preserve other Arizona species.
Underneath the surface, there is life.
He got away. He got away.
Unlike most anglers using poles and fishing line, game and fish researcher Kristopher Stahr and his partners have the advantage of catching fish using a less traditional technique, filtering the river's flow with nets. They throw back most catches.
Yeah, we don't want to keep him.
And keep this guy, the Sonoran Sucker.
I think they're a beautiful fish, actually. You know, the bass and the trout get all the love, but it's really, something Arizonans should be proud of.
Call it the underdog of Oak Creek. As a plant and crustacean eater, it provides a vital link to the food chain of Arizona and New Mexico waterways.
It's important to educate the, folks that we have these fish and sort of how important they are to our legacy.
And possibly our future. You see, there's a growing worry about Arizona's live bait fish industry, which is all outsourced from states like Arkansas. In recent years, wildlife experts have emphasized using native fish as bait, alarmed by cautionary tales of what happens when non-natives invade waterways. The most publicized, the Asian carp infestation in the Mississippi, where that jumping fish causes a nuisance to boaters and has decimated the population of native fish species. So back here in Arizona, researchers believe the Sonoran Sucker is an ideal candidate as a disease-free, appetizing, native alternative bait fish. Stahr wants to figure out the best ways to spawn the fish, produce them on a mass scale, and begin introducing them to the live bait market within 2 years, giving anglers a native option for live bait.
A lot of folks don't even know about native fish. That's why it's important to do this research so we can keep conserving these guys.
And Sonoran suckers are not considered threatened or endangered, but they have dwindled in population over the decades.
Oh. And I'm guessing not edible.
And not edible for anglers. No.
I had no training in that, as you probably could tell. So I always laugh when I see that, because I talk about how fish are important to our legacy, and I always think that's such a weird thing. It's such a weird line. I was thinking about that too. So you never quite know what you'll be working with, basically. So
Someone wanted to know, have you personally ever dealt with the jumping carp in the Mississippi?
I have. When I worked with Iowa, we actually had sampled the Mississippi River, and we saw Asian carp there. So
That's pretty cool. I've seen them jump myself. It can be kind of alarming sometimes.
It can be. Yeah. Some of them are huge too. They can, cause some pain if they get.
And then someone asked, how exactly do the carp? How are they harming native fish species?
Okay, so the way these carp, it's kind of a twofold way. So first off is so Asian carp are made of two species called silver carp and bighead carp, and they're both filter feeders. So they eat zooplankton and phytoplankton. They're like the very bottom of the food chain. So and you saw how big these fish get, which means they have to consume a crazy amount of zooplankton and phytoplankton. But what also needs zooplankton and phytoplankton are invertebrates and juvenile fish. So when we see these Asian carp come into a lake, or sorry, like a, like get expand population, our sport fish suffer. So, so the other fish don't have all the food. And then also, a female Asian carp can produce over 1 million eggs. So we're talking about really reproducing and very, very quickly. So that's, yeah, so those are kind of the two general ways that on why they're bad for our waters and our ecosystems, because that, and once they're established, this fish and river, there's really no way to get rid of them.
So interesting. Explain to me a little bit about how a carp from Asia gets to Nebraska.
That is a great point. So in China and Asia, silver carp and big hard carp are raised in hatcheries for food. That's what they're so they're a delicacy over there. And it was brought here to fish farms for that reason, and because, like I said, these fish eat plankton to help with algae control. And what happened, especially in the 90s when the Mississippi River flooded, it flooded out some of these farms in the Mississippi River basin, and that's how it allowed these carp to escape into the river. So they went, from there they went to the Mississippi River and then up the Missouri, and now they're in the Platte, they're in the Loop, they're in, so they're, yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about sometimes, it's sort of like European starlings, we have them all over North America now, right? But it started with one introduction of 500 birds in New York City.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, how it starts and snowballs after that.
So it's one of those things where scientists were like, this is a good idea. And now we're like, that's not a good idea.
Something like that. Yeah. So.
And then your friends at Montgomery County Conservation were wondering, what did you specifically study in Lewis, Iowa? And are there any topics that you wanted to raise a higher interest in?
Well, when I worked in Southwest Iowa, like I said, we worked a lot with catfish, and we were especially doing population estimates. So trying to find out exactly how many fish are in the lakes. So we do that by taking little clips of fins and trying to recapture the fish over and over again to kind of put it in some model and tells us how many fish are in the lake actually. And then I also worked a lot with aquatic macrophytes, aquatic vegetation, like I said. But, one of the things I didn't get to do a lot of, and I thought was cool, is I did get to sample some of the streams in Southwest Iowa. And it was really cool. We found some really cool native species like tadpole mad toms, these little tiny native catfish and stuff like that. So I think that's probably the one thing I wanted to do more work on, is trying to find out some of those other small streams and see what's in them. I think everyone always wonders, a stream, what's in there, so that's sort of where my mind goes, especially as a fish biologist. So
you got to be a fish detective for a little bit.
I did, yeah, and that was pretty fun. So.
Awesome. I think we're all caught up on questions for
Gotcha.
now.
Gotcha. Well, this is so like I said, now I worked in Northern Arizona, and this is, as you probably guessed, so this is Grand Canyon. This is the Colorado River going through Grand Canyon. And the last big project I had in Arizona before I left for Nebraska was working with a razorback sucker and bony-tailed chub. So I'll first off saying these are probably two of the most endangered fish in the country, especially bony-tail. And these are, in Arizona, I talked about not a lot of those bass catfish being native. These fish adapted to the desert Southwest and water that is very, very different. You see the razorback sucker has this really cool appendage on the top of its head to help navigate some of the flows. That's what I think it's there for in the old Colorado River before it was dammed, because now it's now the Colorado River is a big, cold, clear river because of the dams. But back in the day, it was a big, muddy, warm river, if you want to think of it that way. So, and when I worked at this aquatic center, we had these fish in aquariums, like they were everywhere, right? But I always stop people when I give tour and look at this bony tail, this fish on the right. At one point, this fish was down to about 20 fish in the world. Bony tail chub in the 80s, they are not producing in the wild. They did an exhaustive search of the Colorado River, and they came up with only a couple dozen fish, and that's what saved the species. So it's weird to see them when there's thousands of them in a tank. But you think about
you'll never see this fish in the wild ever in your life, you know. So that's kind of that's something that got me really, really passionate about that. So, and the reason, you know, why these fish have declined, and these fish are stocked. I'm talking about stocking, right? So in the Colorado River now, money is spent every year because of the dam. Congress has mandated to mitigate for the damage they caused to the native species that are endangered. They have to stock hundreds of thousands of these fish each year, right? But actually only about 5% survive. So think about how many fish are being stocked. Like I read a statistic that you could walk across the Colorado River with just, you know, fish that were stocked, you know, on top of each other, you know. And, you know, the part of the reason is they get eaten. So what happens when you raise these fish in a hatchery, you know, they're in a tank, you know, they're not exposed to predators. They get, you know, they get thrown pellets to eat every day. They don't know what a predator is. So my research was trying to find a way for these endangered fish to know what a predator was. So, and I'll show you a picture from my research. So these are a picture of bony tail. They're trying to hide underneath the bass. So like they don't know a bass is bad. So that's kind of the crazy part. So, so what we found with some of our preliminary stuff is here, I'll go back, is razorback sucker and bony tail chub have, and in the skin of some fish is an alarm pheromone called Schreckstoff substance. We don't know a lot about it actually, which adds to the mystery, but kind of when that's released through the skin, it signals a warning to all the other fish that this is danger, right? So it tells them to run away and try and avoid danger. So what we came up with is a way to train fish, right? So we need to expose these kind of for lack of a better word, these dumb hatchery fish to a predator, right? So that, and that's what we did. So we took largemouth bass and we added these naive hatchery fish, right? But there's a little problem when you're working with endangered fish, right? You can't just kill endangered fish or put them at risk, right? You know, so we needed a way that we could still get the fish to get trained, so to speak, but for them not to get eaten, right? So I did some research, and this is what I came up with, was botox. So actually it had been used for a few other studies in using botox, the same thing people use in their face for facelifts and everything like that, to paralyze muscle groups basically. And that's what it does. It removes wrinkles, it paralyzes muscle groups. So we used it to paralyze the jaw muscles in largemouth bass. So they could still eat a dead fish, you know, or something like that, but they couldn't eat a live fish. They couldn't open their mouth fast enough, you know. So we got them to be able to chase the fish around, you know, without them getting eaten. So that's my mad scientist idea. So let them, let no one say that your idea is too weird or far out, because, you know, and it worked. It actually worked. So, and that work is still being done, right? But talk about the disadvantages of buying weird stuff, right? So when I bought Botox, for non-human grade Botox, it is $400 a microgram, right? There's 1,000 milligrams in a microgram. There's 1,000 milligrams in a gram. It's a 453.6 grams in a pound. So a housefly weighs 11.5 milligrams, right? So if we do the math, a housefly would cost $4.6 million at the cost for Botox. So yeah, I bought 2 micrograms, and I'm not. So yeah, you talk about trying to buy things for your research. Yeah, you try to explain to the purchasing agent that you want to buy Botox to use on fish. They think you're pretty crazy sometimes. So
that's super cool, thinking about training a behavior into a fish.
Yeah.
Like I think that's something a lot of people don't think of. Someone had asked a couple times, you've talked about sampling wild fish. What is involved when you sample a fish?
Well, so when we sample a fish, we try and get an idea of how many are out there in the environment. So we run nets, we electrofish, and we try and capture like a subset,
and then using how many we catch, we can kind of get an idea of sort of how many are in the lake. So yeah, we kind of sample fish to capture them, to get information off of them, if that makes sense. So
Awesome.
yeah. So yeah, so I bought botox. So, and actually it's a true story. I'm on an FBI database for buying botox. So botox, or botulinum toxin, is actually one of the most toxic substances to humans. So they didn't want somebody at a fish hatchery in northern Arizona giving out, botox facelifts for free. So they had to know exactly how much was there at all times. So, which brings me back to Nebraska. So I've been in Nebraska for 5 years, and then I accepted this position in August as the Aquatic Invasive Species Program Manager. So pretty much my job now is I'm kind of in charge of everything in the state of Nebraska for aquatic invasive species, and that's plants, that's those jumping carp, those are zebra mussels, they could be anything that you can think of, right? So this is where I would have ended my presentation had this next sequence happen in November, right? So again, I'm pretty new, we're just kind of getting our feet wet, but I get an email about this unknown organism in this pond in Grand Island, right? And they think it's a freshwater jellyfish. They think it's something kind of weird, right? And I thought, okay, yeah, sure, right? So I get a picture of this, but then I see a video, and I'll show you the same video I received, okay? So what the heck is that, right? So after that, we thought, well, maybe we should go take a look at this, right? So we went to this pond in Grand Island. We took some samples, we took some specimens. We looked at them underneath the microscope and stuff, right? But we still really couldn't find out whether it's a plant or an animal or something different. So we reached out to other states and other institutions to see what it is, right? And I was like, surely somebody knows what this is, right? It turns out they don't. So I emailed all of the different state agencies from California to Iowa, and no one knows what this is. And that's really weird because it looks like it's kind of a moving plant type organism. You think someone should, you think you know everything, right? But we still don't know what it is. So it eventually got passed around. And it got sent to the assistant undersecretary for invasive species to the secretary of the interior. So, which got forwarded to a couple of scientists from the Smithsonian, and they disagreed on what it was. So I had two people from the Smithsonian tell me two different things. Whether it was a bryozoan, some weird organism, or a colonial hydroid that was invasive, right? So long story short, we still are not quite sure what it is. I have a couple more videos I'll show you when we were out.
It sure looks like it's...
Yeah, look, watch.
Some movement.
But pretty much it's an odd because it appears to respond to stimuli and move, right? But it's not a plant, but it's not a true animal as well. So we're trying to find out exactly what this is. And we're actually going to be running some DNA at the University of Nebraska Kearney with some of our partners out there to get an idea of just what this is. So, yeah, you talked about being a fish detective.
Here, can I see that?
Like, I didn't think that would
So
be,
watch this, it'll...
something I would deal with my first couple months on the job is find this organism that nobody knows what it is and can decide what it is or move and things like that. So, and you see there it actually moves independently across the water like a skimmer. So
It's amazing. You heard it here, folks. There might be aliens in Nebraska. Usually when people discover new species, right, it's like something super small or something in a really weird area. But this is, it's a big thing. You can see with your eyes. It's on the surface of the water.
So, and I've worked in water across the country,
and I've talked to people that have, and nobody can tell me exactly what it is. And I don't know.
Yeah.
So, it's just nuts to me to think about that no one knows what this is. So we're
That's
still
so cool.
So
Tabitha would like to know how many were out there and about how wide is this thing spread?
it was in a really tiny old sand pit in Grand Island, and there weren't a bunch of them. There were probably 10 or 12, and we actually went back a couple times. And the problem is by the time it was we got there the second time, it was started to die off, it seemed like. So it wasn't really moving like that. It was just sort of limp. So we weren't, we didn't get some great samples. So it wasn't really widespread, but we kind of think that this maybe had been there before. And I should say the whole reason that we noticed this is we got a call at Game Parks that there was a fish. So overnight, there was a big fish kill on this pond, and it happened because of low oxygen. But it got the landowners walking around and said, "What the heck is this and this and this?" And that's when we got the call. So yeah, we're still working on it. I promise we'll post it to the Game and Parks site and stuff when we figure it out. But
Yeah, I think we're all hooked now. You have to let us know when you solve the mystery.
oh, it's crazy. And like I said, and I still can't figure it out. So we had to have, to think that people from the Smithsonian were looking at this. You guys are, and no one can think of a good, kind of a good answer is kind of, hilarious to me. Like everyone with their, doctorates and their, fancy, big degrees and stuff. And we still have something that we kind of throw up our hands up like, I don't know. So that's kind of the end of my presentation, but I kind of want to give you a few parting thoughts. Lauren said this was kind of geared more towards high school students or people kind of looking to get into the, in wildlife or conservation, jobs. So I want to come up with a few things I've learned over the years. The first thing is embrace your weird. So I talked about, working with aquatic plants and nerding out about that. And that kind of got me a few places along my career, and working with native fish that kind of no one thought were cool and stuff. So there's a niche out there for you, so just kind of find it, and be open-minded. If you told me I was in Northern Arizona working with hormone injections into Sonora Suckers when I was in high school, yeah, I was like, I thought you were crazy, or something like that. But to kind of be open-minded helped a lot. And just keep swimming. Like I talked about, it's not easy to get your dream job right away. And I have a lot of interns, and that's what, they're kind of disappointed where they can't get their dream job right away, right? But it takes some time, and, but if you just keep working at it, you're going to get there. And then the last thing I wanted to share is this saying called, remember where you came from. This was told to me on my very first day as a, 19-year-old scared intern, okay, for the Iowa DNR. I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to run a boat. I didn't know how to back a truck up. I didn't know what a fish, species were, fish. And that was the first thing that my boss told me that day. So, and that's meant to say that eventually, some of you guys will be in charge of people, right? And, you'll get scared people and interns, and, you'll need an extra second to help them along the way. So, hang on. So those are just a few parting thoughts I've come up with over the years. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions you have. And there's my email and my office phone number. So if anyone's interested, you can shoot me an email or give me a call. So yeah, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. If anyone has any final questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. While you're doing that, I just want to add one more thing. No matter what career field people are in, I want them to think of kind of big and small, what they can do for conservation, even if it's just at home. Is there anything that you can suggest we can do to help aquatic species or help limit invasive species as even just everyday citizens?
Oh man, this is my wheelhouse. So yeah, the biggest thing for aquatic species is, once they're established, it hurts our native, and not just native aquatic, birds and insects and stuff like that rely on nice, non-infested water. So, you know, when you're going from a water body, make sure your boat or whatever is clean, drained, and dried, you know, so you don't pass that. Because, you know, some of this stuff can spread by a fragment, or for a zebra mussel can spread in a drop of water, you know, and it's not visible to the naked eye. So, and with that, you know, the only thing I like people think of is think of, you know, weird, you know, species that maybe not get the love, you know, like I talked about in that Sonora Sucker video about how probably no one really cared about the Sonora Sucker, right? When it was just there doing its thing. But I think they're such a cool native fish that's only found here in the whole world, you know, like there's species like that here in Nebraska, you know, you know, and when you think about that, you know, when you think about, you know, how you put your yard together and how to drain off into the streams and stuff like that, you know, it kind of all comes together. So those are a couple of the things I can think of right off the top of my head. So
Awesome. Yeah. Tabitha had also asked what could have caused the low oxygen in the area that the Nebraska aliens were in.
So what happened was kind of a phenomenon called a lake turnover event. And this is actually kind of, it's not uncommon in ponds and some lakes. Is what happens is during the summer, especially with low wind, is you kind of have two surfaces of water in the lake, right? The bottom part is really cold and doesn't have much oxygen. And the top part is really warm and has oxygen, right? But as the summer goes on, the density of the water, these actually don't mix together, right? So if you've ever seen like, you know, people do, you know, like liquids and like the red liquid is stacked on top of the blue one and doesn't mix together, right? That's sort of what happens. And then in the fall, what can happen sometimes is when you get a big wind event or a storm, it can mix those layers together. So now you're getting this water level, this water a layer with no oxygen mixed in the whole lake, where before it was kind of constrained to the bottom. So it's not
interesting,
typical, but that's something that can happen, especially in ponds and stuff like that. So
gotcha. And our Montgomery County conservation friends said that they're trying to put together a solid aquatics lab program for their students. Do you have any recommendations for a good starting point to get them really hooked on aquatic life?
Oh man, that's a good question. That might be something that you can shoot me an email for, because I should think about that. You know, I've dealt with some of the students and stuff like that, and you know, there's a few, like Nebraska does this trout in the classroom, where different classes, like they get trout eggs and raise them up. You know, they kind of get that experience. So that's something that I found is when people have, you know, and when I was in Arizona, we would actually take native fish and kind of set up an aquarium in their classroom, and that's what gets people there, is some of those live specimens. But so that's something I think of off the top of my head. But yeah, just shoot me an email and I'd be happy to talk more with kind of some of the educational stuff I have. So
awesome. And then we had another question. How can a lay person study plant ID of native aquatic plant species? They personally have a kayak and muck boots as their tools, but what other tools or maybe ID resources do you use, such as books, apps, etc.?
Oh man, I have some good ones. So Texas A&M has a good site called Aquaplant. And that's a good site because you can kind of pick on the picture on what it looks like and things like that. So it's Aquaplant at Texas A&M. If you want, also I've developed some of these lectures for different plant species. So who's ever asking can shoot me an email, and I can share them what I've made for like our interns and stuff. You can kind of see that way, and I probably have a few more I can think of too back in my office, but. Yeah, there's a few websites, and that's the first one I can think of is Aquaplant and Texas A&M. But yeah, there's a few of them that kind of have pond ID and things like that. But yeah, shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to give you some more information. So
great, awesome. So yeah, you guys heard him. Go ahead and take down his email if you want to contact him further. Last call for any further questions. Otherwise, Kris, we've had tons of people saying thank you and great talk. I know I had a lot of fun learning about cool fish and aquatic plants and animals. And it was really fun night.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And like, you guys do awesome work. So yeah, you guys go check out the Nebraska Wildlife Rehab because I do some cool stuff. So
Thank you. Yeah, we try. We have another one of our speaker series. The next one is coming up on March 16th, which is with Dennis Ferraro, who is from Nebraska, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and we will be learning more about snakes and reptiles on that night. So thanks again, Kris, for coming, and thanks everyone else for tuning in with us. This was a great talk, and I'm glad to have you guys all here tonight. With that, everyone, thanks for coming, and we'll see you later.
thank you.